Why couldn't the tribe of Judah drive out the inhabitants of the lowland in Judah? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Judges on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Judges 1 verses 12 to 26, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Judges 1 verse 12, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Judges chapter 1, beginning at verse 12. Then Caleb said, "Whoever attacks Kirjath-sepher and takes it, to him I will give my daughter Achsah as wife." And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So he gave him his daughter Achsah as wife. Now it happened, when she came to him, that she urged him to ask her father for a field. And she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, "What do you wish?" So she said to him, "Give me a blessing, since you have given me land in the south. Give me also springs of water." And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Now the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the south near Arad. And they went and dwelt among the people. And Judah went with his brother Simeon, and they attacked the Canaanites, who inhabited Zephath, and utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hormah. Also Judah took Gaza with its territory, Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. So the Lord was with Judah. And they drove out the mountaineers, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland, because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moses had said. Then he expelled from there 3 sons of Anak. But the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. So the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. And the house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. So the house of Joseph sent men to spy out Bethel. The name of the city was formerly Luz. And when the spies saw a man coming out of the city, they said to him, "Please show us the entrance to the city, and we will show you mercy." So he showed them the entrance to the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword. But they let the man and his family go. And the man went to the land of the Hittites, built a city, and called its name Luz, which is its name to this day. In our last lesson, we said that the beginning of the book of Judges is confusing because at the end of Joshua, we had Israel dwelling in the promised land, seemingly in peace. But remember in Joshua's farewell address that there were still Canaanites living in the land that Israel had, and they had not dealt with them yet, something that that had the ability to lead Israel off into sin. So even though time had passed, probably about 25 years from when Israel divided the land, there was still work to be done by Israel in order to root out the remaining Canaanites from the land, meaning that most of what we have here in chapter 1 happened after the death of Joshua and is not a repeat of what occurred in the book of Joshua. The reason I say most of the events of chapter 1 occur after the death of Joshua is because the events in verses 12 to 16 are events that have occurred during the days of Joshua. We'll talk why in a few moments. Judah was the first of the tribes to go up and begin warring with the Canaanites in their inheritance, accompanied by the tribe of Simeon, whose inheritance was found with the tribes of Judah. They did drive out many of the peoples remaining within their territory and even burn Jerusalem down, though they did not completely destroy the Jebusites, who would continue to control the city until the days of King David. In the south, Judah and Simeon destroyed the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron, the inheritance of Caleb and Deber. It is here in verses 12 to 15 that we have an insertion referring to an event that we have recorded in Joshua 15, 13, and 19. How can we conclude that what is recorded here in Judges 1 is the insertion, and that the insertion didn't take place in Joshua 15 instead? And the reason is because it has to do with the man Caleb. When Caleb received his inheritance, he was 85 years old. At the time of Joshua's death, assuming that Joshua was the same age, that would have made Caleb 110 too. Caleb would have been even older if Joshua was younger than him. And while people living to be older than 110 is not foreign to Scripture, at that day and time it was. For Psalms 90 verse 10, a psalm ascribed to Moses, says that man's lifespan normally is between 70 and 80 years, meaning to live longer was unusual. With God, of course, anything is possible, but it is much more likely that the event is inserted here in Judges 1, not only as a reminder for Israel of what had happened earlier in the days of Caleb concerning the conquering of Debir, that had to be repeated many years later, but also as a way to introduce Othniel, who would become Israel's first judge, a fact we'll discuss in chapter 3. Seeing as how we've discussed this story already, and Judges gives us no new information, if you'd like a more in-depth look at that, we invite you to listen to Lesson 37 of our Joshua series, which can be found on our YouTube channel under the Walking Through the Bible Joshua playlist. Verse 16 does give us an interesting piece of information, though, that we didn't get from Joshua, and that concerns the Canaanites, the people related to Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. Back in Numbers 10, 29-32, Moses, when Israel was preparing to leave Sinai, asked Hobab, his brother-in-law, to leave Midian with his family and come with Israel to Canaan, where they would receive good land. At first, Hobab refused, after which Moses insisted. Numbers leaves it ambiguous as to what happened, but Judges clears up here in chapter 1 what happened. For though Hobab wasn't referred to as a Kenite in Numbers, the Kenites are referred to as descendants of Moses' father-in-law here in Judges, so we can know that Hobab was a Kenite. That means that Hobab did bring his family with Israel, and that family has since grown in the 75 years since Sinai. And Moses' words came true, for they did receive good land in the south of Judah and dwelt among the peoples there. Bringing it back now to the present time in Judges, in verses 17-19, Judah and Simeon continue their conquest of the territory of Judah and Simeon, destroying the peoples who dwelt in the south and on the coast. From our later study in Judges, it appears that this conquest was incomplete, but it was more complete than in the days of Joshua, for Joshua 11:22 would show us that this land remained largely unconquered in the days of Joshua, though it was given to Judah. Judah's success continued into the mountains of Judah, but stalled in the lowlands. Why? Because the people there had chariots of iron. We noted in Joshua that these chariots wouldn't be completely made out of iron, but would be tipped with iron on the sides, meaning that those parts acted like scythes that would be able to cut the enemy down like grass. When iron was added to these chariots, though, it added weight to the chariots, meaning they were no good for use in mud or mountains, but would be excellent in flat, dry areas, hence why the lowlands were a perfect place to use them. But the real reason that Judah couldn't take the lowlands was not the chariots. It was a lack of faith in God. With God with them, Judah could have defeated the Canaanites just as they did in other places. But Judah saw the chariots, became fearful, and therefore didn't defeat the Canaanites here. Letting these peoples remain meant that their populations would grow, allowing them to later repopulate certain areas that Israel had just gained control of. So this fear and lack of faith in God would have major consequences on the people of Israel, as we'll see later on in Judges. Verse 21 tells us that Benjamin didn't drive out the Jebusites that dwelt in Jerusalem, despite the children of Judah burning the city to the ground earlier. In case you're confused, remember, Jerusalem sat on the border between Benjamin and Judah, though the city was originally given to the tribe of Benjamin. The Jebusites thus remained after the city was burned, and the Jebusites were allowed to remain to dwell among the children of Benjamin until this day, showing us that the book of Judges was written before the days of King David, who took that city. And then finally, we get the events of verses 22-26. The city of Bethel was a border town between Benjamin and Ephraim, much like Jerusalem was a border town between Judah and Benjamin. The city itself was given to the tribe of Benjamin in Joshua 18:22. However, here in Judges 1, we see the first signs of Bethel becoming under the control of Ephraim. For it is Ephraim of the house of Joseph who went out to spy Bethel in order to drive out the remaining Canaanites there, and the Lord was with Ephraim. Bethel was the name that Jacob gave the city back in Genesis 35:15, though the city's former name was Luz. When the spies came towards the city, they saw a man coming out of the city, meaning the city limits, to which they inquired where the entrance was. Knowing that he was unlikely to give this information up easily, the men of Ephraim promised that when the city was destroyed by them, they would let this man and his family go if he gave them the information they wanted. The man did, and like it was with Rahab and her family in Joshua 6, The men of Ephraim kept their word to this man and his family when the city was struck down, left Bethel, and went to the land of the Hittites, which would likely be somewhere in modern-day Turkey, and built a city there that was named Luz, named after the city he left. We don't know where this city is, but even though this is true, we shouldn't discount the Bible's history on this, for the writer of Judges knew, even if we don't. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Judges chapter 1, verses 27 to 36, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.